Today's video is sponsored by Crossout, a totally free-to-play vehicle shooter game where players build their own vehicle and pit it against other players' creations. Brilliant. Now, Crossout isn't one of those supposedly customizable games where it's like, yeah, you can build your own vehicle. You absolutely can. If by build your own vehicle, we mean select one of our pre-built vehicles and then choose the ammunition. No. This is a totally customizable game. Players build their own combat vehicle from the ground up. You choose a frame. It's literally just a frame. Sometimes it's just a piece of metal that is like a rectangle. And then you get to add everything else yourself. Drivetrains, support systems, paint jobs, and of course, the all-important weaponry. Want to cover the backside with a chainsaw? Yes! How about Gatling guns on either side? A crossbow on top? Yes! Build it well, you will dominate. Build it badly, and you will get dominated. No, it just won't work. Like, you built it, but you didn't include an engine. It's not going to work. It's a super fast-paced game with lots of different game modes, including PvP, PvE raids, and also you've got pretty much limitless freedom to create. One thing I like about Crossout is it's not super complicated. I don't spend a lot of time getting into games like super deep. I just like getting in and playing games, and Crossout is super accessible from the start. Just fire it up. Easy, you're good to go. There's no learning the ropes, just immediate gameplay. And if you do want to play games longer, there's tons of extra stuff you can get into. I'm yet to explore that because I just like playing quick games. Best of all, it's totally free to play, available PC, Xbox One, or PS4, so lots of different options. Just go to xo.link/xo side projects to get a free bonus starter set with 3 extra weapons or a vehicle cabin. Very cool. Thank you, Crossout, and now today's video. If you were asked to list the greatest inventors in world history, who would come to mind first? Maybe Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla. Although those juggernauts of innovation are unquestionably worth our time and attention, one of the greatest inventor minds of all time often slips under the radar, even though his inventions are known by billions around the world. John Moses Browning was a genius who single-handedly evolved human combat. Born to a middle-class merchant and inventor in the newly established Utah Territory as one of 22 children in a polyamorous Mormon household, this self-taught inventor would move from a small-town blacksmith to the US military's personal weapon designer. Our recent video on the M2 machine gun highlights just one example of his incredible design prowess, so check that out if you want to see another of his influential designs. He designed so many weapons used by soldiers in the last century that many books can, and indeed have, been written about them. However, one of his inventions definitely stands above the rest. The Colt M1911 semi-automatic handgun forever changed firearms. Acting as the standard issue handgun in all branches of the US military for almost the entirety of the 20th century, it saw combat in every conflict from World War I to Kuwait. Aside from being one of the deadliest weapons of all time, it was also the first widespread and reliable semi-automatic handgun, and it has been the template of which nearly all modern firearms have been based off. This singular invention has had a huge impact on firearms and war, and one man made all of it a reality. Born in 1855, John Moses Browning was surrounded by firearms basically from birth. His father was a blacksmith and gun designer who had previously achieved modest wealth by inventing one of the earliest rifles with a multi-shot magazine. Although his design wouldn't see huge proliferation, it was successful enough in the Wild West of the 19th century of America to make sure that the large family wouldn't struggle. Browning worked in his father's workshop starting at the age of 7 and learned quickly. He was an excellent student and was awarded his high school diploma early, supposedly after the teacher of his one-room schoolhouse said that she had already taught him everything she knew. He apprenticed with his father for several years, but eventually his skills surpassed the older Brownings. He sold one of his inventions to Winchester in 1878, further solidifying his financial security. It also started his relationship with the US Army that would prove to be the most important business relationship of his career. By the 1890s, Browning was one of the go-to names in gun design. Whether it was for Colt, Remington, Winchester, or the US government, if a simple but effective design was needed, John Browning was the man to talk to. His 1886 rework of an iconic Winchester lever-action rifle unquestionably cemented his position as the greatest weapon designer in the world at the time. However, the world had drastically changed since Browning started designing weapons. His biggest customer, the US military, had just engaged in a conflict unlike any that it had previously taken part in. The Philippine-American War is often an overlooked part of American history that had a larger impact on America than many people realize. The tactics, strategies, and tools that they used in that conflict set the stage for World War I. One of the many revelations that the war revealed was how outdated many of the standard issue firearms were. The Colt New Army M1892 was the new standard issue sidearm for soldiers. Being significantly smaller and lighter than the Smith & Wesson Model No. 3 Schofield it was replacing, many soldiers were glad for a few less pounds to carry in the sweltering Philippine landscape. However, this lower weight came with a serious drawback too: a much smaller cartridge. For the last half of the 20th century or more, all military sidearms have been 44 or 45 caliber pistols. At nearly 12 millimeters, they were very large rounds with incredible stopping power. Even the toughest enemy combatants could be stopped by a round or two from these devastating sidearms. On the contrary, the M1892 fired a 38 caliber bullet that came in a hair over 9 millimeters and with significantly less powder behind the rounds. The soldiers found that this was a devastating drawback because even well-placed rounds did not guarantee neutralizing an enemy combatant. Also, many of their Philippine adversaries would use copious drugs with analgesic effects to eliminate pain. Even placing 6 rounds on a target wasn't a guarantee that the threat would be neutralized. Since soldiers using a sidearm were already resorting to a secondary or tertiary weapon, this was entirely unacceptable. Once again, Browning was the man who was called to fix the issue and to ask to work with legendary firearm manufacturer Colt, who would handle their production. He was given a set of very ambitious requests by top military brass. Firstly, and most importantly, the round was to be chambered in nothing smaller than a 45 caliber. This was to alleviate the stopping power issue faced by smaller rounds. However, this was the lesser request. They also wanted the gun to be a fully functional and reliable semi-automatic pistol. After having supplied the US military with a fully automatic machine gun for the Spanish-American War a few years earlier, they had confidence they'd be up to the task. However, semi-automatic and automatic weapons were just in their infancy. For those unacquainted with the technology, semi-automatic refers to a firearm that automatically loads a subsequent live round ready to be fired with the action of firing the previous shot. Although double-action revolvers could sometimes allow someone to fire 6 shots in a row without reloading, that was simply due to the mechanism of the cylinder chambering the next round. In semi-automatic weapons, the energy produced in the recoil or from gas expansion in the barrel is utilized to chamber the next round. Importantly, the trigger has to be pulled individually each time a round was to be fired, unlike their fully automatic counterparts in which the trigger could continue to stay depressed for continued fire. This design offered numerous advantages to troops. Firstly, reloading was extremely quick. Even though the military had long moved away from muzzle-loading firearms, revolvers still had to have their rounds slotted into each of the 6 chambers before they could continue firing, and then they would have to repeat the process 6 rounds later. Semi-automatics could utilize a magazine system that would allow for a preloaded magazine to just slip into the firearm and continue to fire after a few seconds. In the field of battle, every second was precious, and cutting down on the extremely vulnerable task of reloading was invaluable. Another advantage was the rate of fire of the weapon. Although revolvers could be fired very quickly, just see any Old West movie where the protagonist feathers the hammer to empty his revolver quickly, this plummeted the shooter's accuracy. The unmanaged recoil meant that soldiers had to re-steady the firearm and re-aim in order to take an accurate follow-up shot, and anyone feathering the hammer would be lucky to hit the broadside of a barn, since aiming was impossible while completing the maneuver. If the design was clever enough, channeling the energy that was released by the bullet as it fired would operate the action of the gun. It had the bonus effect of keeping the firearm much more level by better managing recoil and allowing for extremely fast follow-up shots, especially if the firearm was heavy and able to further dampen the recoil. However, this new style of weapon was not without its drawbacks. Semi-automatics were extremely rare at the time and just as fragile. German firearms manufacturer Mauser had released its Mauser C96 pistol, better known as the broom handle, just a few years before. Although it is iconic in its own right for its beautiful design and also as the inspiration for Han Solo's antecedently firing sidearm, it was an unreliable disaster. It shot beautifully as long as it was perfectly clean and all the rounds were made within unimaginably strict tolerances. As soon as the action was exposed to any dirt or a slightly imperfect round, the whole gun jammed, making it little better than the broom handle it was named after. This made it practically unusable on the battlefield. Back across the pond, Browning had just finished designing and selling his first semi-automatic shotgun, the Browning Auto 5. This was a functional and robust weapon, but was heavy and also large enough to handle the shotgun shells with sturdier components in the large full-sized action. He had also released the first semi-automatic pistol for the consumer market, chambered in .38 in 1900, but as previously mentioned, that caliber was significantly less powerful and many of the components would be obliterated by the far larger .45 caliber round. This meant that Browning was near square one again. Although he knew how to make semi-automatic firearms, he had been one of their inventors after all, this was still a unique challenge. He needed a more powerful gun that was reliable in all circumstances. It had to be the more powerful .45 caliber, but robust enough to handle the abuse of firing thousands of rounds. It needed many moving parts, but had to be simple enough to be serviced by soldiers in the field. However, he already thought he had some solutions to these problems. The first issue was finding a cartridge in at least .45 caliber that would be reliable in the more finicky semi-automatic actions. One of the biggest advantages of revolvers is that they can easily fire poorly made rounds of aluminium fairly well, an enormous benefit in the early and haphazard days of individual self-contained cartridges. There were more than enough options to pick from. The most famous gun of all time to that point in history, the Colt single-action army revolver, was chambered in the bone-rattling .45 long Colt cartridge. You could take a look at our video on that weapon if you want a closer look at it. This legendary sidearm was notorious for its incredible power, but the round was too long. Since the action would need to pull each round from the magazine and into the chamber, a long round would bulk up the whole gun significantly. He looked at several other pre-existing cartridges, but all of them were deficient in some way or another. Just as he would do in less than a decade with the M2 machine gun, he developed his own brand new cartridge for the gun. The .45 caliber automatic Colt pistol, .45 ACP, was created specifically for the new gun that it was being designed alongside. As powerful as it was stout, this new round was naturally a perfect fit. With the issue of the cartridge sorted, the rest of the weapon fell into place around it. The final design is one that will look familiar to nearly everyone with firearms experience or who has played any military shooter game video released since 2007. Even if you hadn't seen or heard of the Colt M1911 before today, its shape and design are likely familiar to you because it has become the benchmark for nearly every semi-automatic pistol since its release. From the magazine bearing handle, the underbarrel receiver spring, to the integrated grip safety, basically every modern sidearm takes some cues from this design. However, iconic looks were not the chief concern of the US military. They had to put it through its paces and make sure that it would hold up to the rigors of warfare. And it actually didn't cut muster on its first outing. Although the weapon was impressive, there were still issues with reliability that needed to be sorted before its wide adoption by the US military. There was also some worry within the company since Colt was in competition with Stevens, another American firearms manufacturer who had developed their own .45 caliber pistol and had hoped to land the lucrative military contract. In 1910, the final competition was held. Although a great Hollywood depiction of the event could raise the stakes by showing a nail-biting competition with many trials and tribulations, it mostly involved military higher-ups shooting the gun in different circumstances to see how it coped with them. In the end, Browning's design came out victorious. It was officially adopted by the US Army on the 29th of March 1911 and officially given its now iconic designation of the Colt M1911. With tensions starting to rise in Europe, it was immediately put into production, but with the Americans' hesitancy to become involved in the European conflict, it wasn't mass-produced. The current plan was to slowly integrate it into the forces until it was the standard issue across all branches of military. However, this wasn't to be. The European conflict exploded from small regional disputes into the First World War. When the US joined the conflict on the side of the Allied powers in 1917, there were less than 70,000 of the pistols produced. This was a trend with American arms and equipment at the time. Their borderline isolationist policies had left America unprepared for a major conflict. With the first wave of troops in June 1917, only 14,000 Americans landed in Europe. This ramped up drastically in both troops and weaponry. By the end of the war, almost 650,000 of the sidearms had been manufactured and acquired by the US military. Unlike its predecessor, the M1911 was a perfect fit. It had checked every single box that the US Army had asked for and somehow exceeded all of the expectations. The weapon had incredible stopping power, was easy to service and maintain, and could handle massive amounts of abuse while still functioning perfectly. Any doubts that may have lingered in the minds of top brass were completely dispelled. It served with distinction in the war and was immediately integrated as an essential part of the service kit for troops. Even once the conflict was over in 1918, many soldiers had already become accustomed to the weapon and wanted one at home, and there were plenty available. When America entered World War II in 1941, they didn't have the issue of slow production that had plagued the US in World War I. Nearly 3 million M1911s were sent with every American troop to every corner of the globe. From Iwo Jima to Normandy, the pistol followed practically every single soldier through the tragedy, triumph, and everything in between. If the gun was not an icon before, well, it certainly was now. Further adding to its popularity was the fact that other iconic weapons of the conflict, such as the Thompson submachine gun or the Browning automatic rifle, were illegal for civilian possessions, unless they were modified to be semi-automatic. However, the M1911 was legal for nearly everyone. Anyone who wanted a piece of iconic and ubiquitous war history could walk down to their local sporting goods store and pull one off the shelf for a modest price. This wasn't the end of the M1911's military service record, though. It continued to be carried on the side of troops through the Korean conflict, Vietnam War, and anywhere else American troops could be found in the middle part of the 20th century. At this point, the M1911 has been the sidearm for 4 generations of troops who served in conflicts that were wildly different. A kid learning to shoot with his father's service pistol would be issued his own when he went into field to fight against a new enemy. Soldiers could assemble and disassemble the weapon blindfolded. The highest ranks of military command would still be seen with the weapon as it was when they carried one when they first joined the service all those years ago. However, this incredible run wouldn't last forever. Although the pistol was functioning as excellently as ever, some innovations in firearms design had started to make the old stalwart of the military show its age by the 1980s. The largest of these criticisms was that it was heavy. At over 1 kilogram unloaded, the weapon was a behemoth, since the rest of a soldier's gear combined floated at around 50 kilograms, and with its large ammunition further weighing down soldiers, some questioned its practicality. Another criticism was the low magazine size. Although innovations in design had seen the pistol go from a 7+1 in the chamber to an 8+1 design, it was still on the low end. The newly introduced M16 assault rifle used banana clips of 30 rounds with far large cartridges. This meant that the 9-shot pistol just couldn't keep up. The pistol was officially retired upon the adoption of the Beretta M9 pistol in 1985, 1 year short of its diamond anniversary at 74 years. Although the US Marine Corps continued to use the pistol all the way up into the 1990s, seeing action in the Gulf War, basically all of them had been phased out by the end of the decade. Although some Special Forces troops choose to use it as their sidearm, the days of every troop carrying the M1911 are behind us. Despite being out of service for over 30 years, the Colt M1911 is still a staple of firearms enthusiasts, with Colt themselves still selling over 10,000 of them a year and dozens of other manufacturers taking advantage of a century-old design that is well out of copy protection. You'll find one on nearly every firing range in the world, from historical replicas meant to emulate the sidearms taken into battle by soldiers in World War II to high-end customs made for elite competition. The M1911 is one of the best-selling weapons of all time. It has seen particular favor in some circles of the competition target shooters due to its incredible accuracy. Well over a century after it was first adopted, it is still hard to outmatch it shot for shot. Colt's Gold Cup line of pistols still utilizes John Browning's design with precious little in the way of innovation and holds a prime space as one of the world's premier competition firearms. Before the M1911, the world was a wild west of revolvers and a few semi-automatics that were just as likely to jam as they were to fire. After the M1911, semi-automatics were the norm and not the exception. If you take a look at basically any handgun released after its adoption before World War I, you can see the fingerprints of this incredible weapon in almost every single design. From the compact German Walther P38 to the massive and overbuilt Desert Eagle, the Colt M1911 has established the design language for what a handgun should be in the modern world. We mentioned earlier that we did a video about the M2. You should definitely check that out as well. I'm going to link to it on the screen now. And thank you for watching. Thanks again to Crossout for sponsoring today's video. Remember, you can try Crossout's free-to-play game by visiting my unique URL, exo.link/exo side projects. Very unique URL. There is a link in the description below for your convenience, and you'll get some exclusive in-game bonuses. Go check them out, and thanks for watching.